Thank you. Please be seated. All right. The court will be in recess until 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Your Honor, can we address that issue that I brought up to the court?
Oh, yes. Give me just a second. Give me just a second. Ms. Devereaux and Mr. Paralegal, and to the parties, before I forget, I just wanted to let you both know I was able to get coverage from treatment court, so we will be able to make use of Thursday afternoon. And Ms. Devereaux, I guess my only hesitation here is that we're close to 5. I'm not sure how much testimony you anticipate. If you believe it'll be lengthy, my preference would be to do it in the morning. Is that
so? I don't think it's going to be.
You don't think it'll be lengthy?
Okay, one moment. I haven't
Sure.
had a chance to talk.
Sure. Deputies, you can go ahead and take Ms. Varela down, and she'll need to be back at 8:30. 8:30, yes.
I think it would be really brief testimony, so
Okay.
we can do it now.
All right. Just for the record, Ms. Devereaux, can you go ahead and just frame the issue, and then we'll address any testimony you want to present.
Sure, Your Honor. Your Honor, it was brought to my attention that in the middle of Ms. Varela's cross-examination at one time when I was approaching to lodge an objection and to discuss it outside the presence of the jury, it was brought to my attention that Ms. Varela's family member called me a fucking bitch. This has been brought to my attention now by 2 different people on the defense team. One is Ms. Brooke Mendoza, who's an investigator with my office, and the other one is Ms. Emma Colbert, who's one of our paralegals from our office. They're seated, just for the record, approximately 2 rows north of Ms. Varela's family, who I believe to be her mother and her sister. And it was loud enough for them to hear that 2 rows up, and essentially only 1 row, Ms. Mendoza and Ms. Colbert are only 1 row, or they're directly behind the bar, I should say. And if they heard it, then I'm concerned then the jury would have also heard it, especially given juror number 14's proximity to the bar is maybe about 8 feet. So I would request to call Ms. Mendoza to testify first, and then Ms. Colbert.
All right. Thank you. Why don't you go ahead? You said Ms. Mendoza first?
Yes, please.
All right. Ms. Mendoza, can you come forward? Thank you. Ms. Mendoza, I'm going to have you have a seat, but before you sit down, will you raise your right hand? Ma'am, do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? All right. Thank you, Ms. Mendoza. Go ahead and have a seat. Ms. Devereaux, you can inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Mendoza, what do you do for a living?
I'm an investigator with your office.
Okay. And as an investigator with my office, have you been assigned to Ms. Rodriguez's legal team?
I have.
And as such, have you been sitting here essentially all afternoon today, March 4th, 2025?
Most, yes.
Yes. And were you here for when I was, sorry, you guys, it's really hard to do this when you're in the back, so if you could just whisper a little lower. Thanks. Were you present in the courtroom when Ms. Varela was testifying?
For most of it.
And did you hear any sort of language coming from Ms. Varela's family directed at me?
Yes.
What exactly did you hear?
The word bitch.
And did you hear it a whisper, or did you hear it louder than a whisper?
I would call it louder than a whisper because I could make out the word.
And how do you know that it was, or who do you believe it was coming from?
A female.
Okay. And where do you believe that female was located?
Directly behind me.
And when you were sitting there and you heard this, who were the only females behind you?
Miss Varela's family.
And how do you know that they're her family?
From the investigation in this case.
And is that also from viewing discovery in this case?
Yes.
And do you know that one was her mother?
Yes.
And do you know that one is her sister, Hannah?
Yes.
And were you able to tell exactly which one that was from?
I could not.
Okay. Nothing further. Thank you, Ms. Mendoza.
All right, thank you. From the state, do you have any questions for Ms. Mendoza? No. All right, thank you. Ms. Mendoza, you can leave the witness stand. Thank you, ma'am. And Ms. Devereaux, did you say you had a second person?
Yes, Ms. Emma Colbert.
Colbert? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. All right, thank you. Ms. Colbert, before you sit down, if you'll raise your hand for me. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you, ma'am. Couldn't have a seat. Ms. Devereaux, go ahead and begin.
Thank you. And Ms. Colbert, can you tell me what you do for a living?
I am a paralegal with the Public Defender's Office.
And have you been sitting here throughout this trial?
Yes.
And is that because you were assigned to this case?
Yes,
And were you present this afternoon when Ms. Varela was testifying?
I was.
And at some point, could you hear some comments coming from behind you?
Yes.
Were they derogatory comments?
Yes.
Can you tell the court exactly what you heard?
I believe I heard fucking bitch.
Okay. And was that a male or a female voice?
I believe female.
Okay. And when you heard this, was there anyone directly behind you?
Miss Varela's family.
And how do you know they're Ms. Varela's family?
From viewing discovery in this case.
Nothing further. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Does the state have any questions for Ms. Colbert?
I do not.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Colbert, you can leave the witness stand. Ms. Devereaux, were those your only two witnesses?
Yes, please.
And did the state wish to present any evidence or witnesses on this issue?
No.
No, okay, thank you. Ms. Devereaux, any argument, and I know there's been a lot of case law on this issue, so Ms. Devereaux, I'm going to ask that you specifically address the Waller factors, because I know that the appellate courts have discussed this quite frequently recently.
And just for the record, the court is discussing People v. Waller, W-A-L-L-E-R, correct?
I didn't actually double check the citation, but if you give me just a moment, I can confirm. And I can go over those.
I think I have it. It's essentially,
Let me go over the factors. That might just be easier, and I'll confirm the citation in just a second. I believe the factors to the Waller test are that, one, the party seeking to close the proceeding must advance an overriding interest that is likely to be prejudiced. Two, that the closure must be no broader than necessary to protect that interest. The trial court, three, the trial court must consider reasonable alternatives to closing the proceeding. And four, the trial court must make findings adequate to support the closure. And I believe that is United States Supreme Court case cited as 467 U.S. 39.
thank you, Your Honor. That is what I have as well. To start with, I would argue that there is an overriding interest that is likely to be prejudiced if the court doesn't close the proceeding. And frankly, Your Honor, I'm not even asking the court to necessarily close the proceeding. I'm asking the court to exclude Ms. Varela's family.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Devereaux, I should be clear. I believe Waller applies whether it's a total or partial closure.
Yes.
And I think the appellate courts have consistently found that exclusion of even one party does constitute a partial closure.
And I just wanted to make sure that, because prong two is that the closure must be no broader than necessary to protect the interest. And I think those things are tied together. My request is nothing broader than to protect the interests of Ms. Rodriguez's constitutional rights to a fair trial and have effective assistance of counsel and due process. And that includes this jury not hearing counsel being called derogatory comments by parties in the galley, especially given the close proximity of the court heard testimony that if my investigator and my paralegal were able to hear these derogatory comments literally maybe 8 to 10 feet from juror number 14, then there is a risk here that this jury may also hear such derogatory comments being made about Ms. Rodriguez's counsel. The court must also consider reasonable alternatives to closing the proceeding, and the court must also to make findings adequate to support the closure. Ms. Rodriguez has a right to a public trial that is also met with dignity and respect, and that was something we actually wadiered on and talked about here. I think it's sending a very concerning message to this jury if we're telling them during jury selection that they have a right, duty, and obligation to be respectful and respectful of each other, but yet they're seeing that this court is allowing family members to make such derogatory comments to counsel. There is no other reasonable alternatives. And again, we're not asking the court to completely close the proceeding. We're simply just asking the court to exclude the family members who have proven to this court that they cannot follow the dignity and rules of this courtroom. And so I'm not sure if the court has any other specific concerns, but that is our request.
And can you tell me, Ms. Devereaux, based on your understanding, you had mentioned the name Hannah. Can you give me what you believe to be the mother and sister's name that you referenced, if you know it?
So it's Hannah Varela, which has been mentioned throughout the testimony in this case. That's the sister's name. And mom's name is Denise Varela.
Denise Varela. All right, thank you. And Mr. McCormick, Mr. Pralia, does the state have a position on this issue?
Judge, I do. We would object to any either partial or full closure in this particular case. I don't believe they've met the factors as set forth in Waller versus Georgia. The other aspect I have is that they were not able to identify an individual, specific individual that said that. They merely said it came from the back of the courtroom. It just so happened to be the day that Ms. Varela was testifying. Some of her family were here in support. I didn't hear it. I don't know. I don't believe Mr. Burrows or Mr. Pralia heard it either. Nobody else came forward at the time. I think at this point that's a pretty drastic remedy to either do a partial or a full closure of the courtroom. I think at this point, if the court has any concerns, an admonishment at this time would be the most appropriate factor. My concern is that, as the court noted, aside from the Waller case, there has been a pretty robust area of law in this regard from the Court of Appeals here in the state of Colorado, and oftentimes, more than not, the case gets reversed because it was an inappropriate closure. I don't believe that this rises to the level of doing that, and we would object.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to order Hannah Varela and Denise Varela to come up to the podium here. And ma'am, just to make sure I have each of you addressed correctly, on the left, are you Denise Varela? Is your name Denise Varela? Is that correct?
Yes, Denise Varela.
All right. And ma'am, are you Hannah Varela?
Yes, my name is Hannah Varela Campos.
All right. Thank you. All right. First, to address the court's factual finding, based on the evidence before the court does find that this remark was made. The court does find the testimony of Ms. Mendoza and Ms. Colbert credible, that they were able to hear the remark. With respect to the jury hearing the remark, the court cannot make that factual finding at this time, although I do acknowledge that whenever some remark like that is made in the courtroom, there is certainly a risk and possibility that the jury has heard that remark. The defendant's advancing of an overriding interest essentially relates to the jurors' exposure to that remark. Again, I do find that is a significant interest that would likely to be prejudiced if the jury.
I'm sorry, she's trying to talk to Mr. Paralia here.
And Ms. Varela, I just need you to stand at the podium here while I make my findings. And I'm sorry, let me review where it was.
And Your Honor, I'm sorry, can you direct Denise Farrell to stop looking at me and giving me dirty looks? This is really just not appropriate.
Listen, I'm trying to make my finding. It's
I
not
appreciate
easy.
that.
I want both of you to just stand at that podium and look at me while I say some things here, okay? Here's my concern that I want to make sure everybody in this courtroom understands. This is not Judge Joe Brown. This is not Judge Judy. This is not a TV show. I am not going to tolerate people just jumping up and talking like this is some goddamn reality TV show, okay? I want to make sure I'm not asking you to talk. I'm not asking you to talk. I want to make sure everybody in this courtroom understands. I have to make some legal findings. I'm not going to have anybody interrupt me while I do so. So the next person that does is going to have some problems. So let me go back to where I was to make sure that I don't skip anything. I do find that the defendant does have an overriding interest in the jury not being exposed to inappropriate remarks. Again, I have stated I cannot make a finding that they have been so exposed, but I do acknowledge the risk of exposure under these circumstances. At this point in time, given that we're only considering a risk, I do not find that closure of the courtroom is appropriate. I do not find that admonishment of the people involved is not I do find that admonishment of the people involved is a reasonable alternative to closing the proceeding. To Ms. Denise Varela and Ms. Hannah Varela, I want to be sure that I am crystal clear with you. I am not paying attention to what is going on in the back of the courtroom because I have so much else that I need to address in this very complicated, long, and complex proceeding. Now that I am on notice, I and my staff are going to have to take time that we otherwise would not need to pay attention to what is going on in the back of the courtroom. I want to make sure that everybody in this courtroom hears me very, very clearly. If there is disruptions in a first-degree murder trial, I might not need to go over the Waller factors. If I see a disruption, we are going to be talking about contempt of court, and I'm going to be sending some people to jail. So if people in this courtroom don't want to go to jail, I would suggest that they think about the dignity of this courtroom, the decorum that is appropriate for a first-degree murder case, appropriate in any sort of court proceeding, and consider that when they're deciding how to act in my courtroom. I am, as I'm sure everybody in this that is in this courtroom can see, a very chill and relaxed, and I hope a patient individual. Where I lose my patience is people not respecting the dignity of the job that I have to do here and the important work of justice that we do in the 19th Judicial District. So I hope everybody is crystal clear with that. I hope nobody is interested in going to jail tomorrow. And I hope that I don't have to address this issue again during this trial. So Ms. Denise Varela, Ms. Hannah Varela, you can go ahead and have a seat. You can take your seat. And I hope everybody in this courtroom considers that when we resume tomorrow morning at 8:30. Ms. Devereaux, any other record that you want the court to make right now?
No, thank you.
Any other record for the state?
Your Honor, just as an officer of the court, I don't want to be the last one to speak. I just simply want to relay the information that was turned to me prior to the advisement. I just want the court
Sure.
I really don't want, I get it.
Okay.
It was just simply relayed to me that they are not the individuals that said the comment.
Okay, and I don't know what that is.
I
Again,
understand.
I
I
just
just
asked the
wanted-
question. That's why I'm not giving anybody specific a hard time. I hope people are listening to me because if they want to find out whether Judge Vill is serious as a heart attack, they can find that out if they push me.
I completely understand. I
All
just
right.
wanted to put on the record because that discussion was provided that she's now speaking to me. I felt as an officer of the court, I needed to tell you that.
I appreciate you telling me that, and we will be in recess until 8:30.